We're told, aren't we, to not look back in anger on the anniversary of 7/7, the horrific Islamist bombings on the UK's London Underground 20 years ago. But what if we do need to look back in order to stay vigilant, in order not to gloss over the fact that terrorism is alive and well in the United Kingdom today? Because I think it's very important that we continue to have this conversation, which is why I have on the show right now Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Welcome aboard, Alan. Great to have you back on the programme. Now, little known secret, I used to work for Alan back in the day at the Henry Jackson Society for a period of time, and I remember back then your impressive think tank had created a report showing that I think the rate was something like one big terror attack was being intercepted and foiled by our security services every single week. Where do we stand today?
Well, today we obviously stand on there being, as you pointed out, quite a lot of terrorism still around, or prospective terrorism. I mean, the amazing thing, thank goodness, we have not had a mass casualty terrorist attack for a number of years, but that isn't because the terrorists aren't trying. It's because our security services have been excellent at thwarting those plots, and the nature of the plots have changed. It's interesting to note that MI5 tell us that 75% of their time is currently occupied by radical Islamist terrorism. That's the sort of area they are most concerned about in terms of the numbers. They do have far right-wing terrorism to focus on, and presumably now a bit of far-left terrorism, seeing as Palestine Action has also been prescribed. So there's a sense of you are getting terrorist attacks from across the board, but radical Islam remains the main focus. It is a clear and present danger, and it has only been by the grace of God and by the ingenuity of the security service that we prevented things from happening. Yes, the threat's changed from 7/7. It's different. It's not, Al-Qaeda organising cells in this country. It's more online radicalisation, but the threat remains.
Someone has suggested to me, and I don't know, this isn't sort of necessarily verifiable, that we could have as many as 30,000 trained Islamist fighters in this country. Look, I don't know whether that is able to be corroborated or not, but what occurs to me is on October the 7th, it took just 3,000 Hamas terrorists to commit the mass atrocities in the kibbutz in Israel on that day. And we're talking about Israel, a nation that has eyes on everywhere in Hamas, who defends that border vigilantly, who are prepared every single day, who has a standing army of 169,500 plus 460,000 reservists. And if we were to imagine that there might be Lord knows how many fully trained Islamist fighters in this country with a standing army of 67,000, we're in trouble deep, aren't we?
Well, I doubt there are 30,000 trained Islamist fighters. Now, are there 30,000, Islamist potential terrorists? Yes, that's definitely the case. We know that because we know that there is a watch list of terror suspects where we have eyes on them, and that number is somewhere in the 40,000. Now, obviously, they won't all be radical Muslim, but given the percentages we were talking about before, you can see where the numbers lie and where it falls. So, yes, there are a large number of, potential suspects, potential people here. They're not going to do a 7/7 style, an October 7th style attack in the UK, though, because of it's a different case. They wouldn't have the capacity to launch something in the way that would happen. The threats we face here, are much more at the moment sort of lone wolf attacks or small groups coming together, like we saw with the Iranians arrested a couple of months ago, trying to commit terror attacks here. So it's a slightly different focus. It doesn't mean, of course, that the effects will not be horrific for anyone caught in such a plot.
Let's talk about Palestine Action now, because for a long time when I've seen these pro-Palestine marches snaking through London, I've considered them to be a perfect recruitment drive. If you happen to be an Islamist entity who wanted to find out who might join the cause, then setting up a few Facebook groups banging on about genocide and getting people to wave the suspect flags on the streets of London is a great way of going about knowing who might be part of your cohort. And what I think is shocking is this idea that Palestine Action, it was recommended by security chiefs that Palestine Action be prescribed back in March, and yet the Labour government sat on this until June, possibly because of the local elections. Why on earth do the government's not seem to be taking the threat from entities such as this seriously?
Well, the government has to answer that question. I think the reality is that once an RAF base was breached, the government had no choice but to do this. Look, there are, of course, legitimate questions about, where you draw the line on protest versus terrorism. The clear reality, though, right now is that this group has crossed that line. That's why, and the security service recognised it's crossed that line some time ago, because this isn't about just protest. It's about direct action, and apparently, from what we are hearing, starting to hear, it was direct action with plans where weapons were being used as well. And it wasn't simply that damage was being caused to things. There's a thought that there might actually be more violent attacks coming, and I think that's part of what the security services know, and we don't. And I would hope that some of this information will become apparent in some of the court cases that will be coming. We can't, of course, discuss them because of the nature of court cases, but we are hoping that there'll be more information available then. And I think once that happens, it will become much more obvious as to why there might have been a need to do this sooner. But look, governments are in difficult positions, but this is an obvious case where, when you face a threat, you ought to have taken action sooner, and eventually that led to an RAF base being breached. But it could have been much worse, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's the old adage, isn't there, that, when it comes to security services, they have to be right 100% of the time. They've got to get it right 100% of the time. A terrorist entity only needs to get it right once, to not be foiled once. Remember back in the day, we used to have a sort of traffic light system for the levels of terror threat. We were told about it all the time. It gave rise to seeing more visible armed policing on our streets and defensive measures made around transport hubs. Where are we at today?
Well, it does still exist. I mean, you've got the different statuses, which you're referring to, of course, in terms of where we would sit in that process. At the moment, we're not seeing the sort of the mass fear that there'll be something tomorrow. But you can be sure that if the security services do feel there's something, there was something fairly recently. If you remember, the threat level was raised. You will hear about it. So the security services are vigilant on these subjects. They're the reasons we are being kept safe right now. There are people out there on our streets who want to harm fellow citizens of this country. The security services are stopping them, and when it is appropriate, they do raise the level according to the intelligence that they get. So I think, we're doing a pretty good job. But as you said earlier, we have to get it right 100% of the time, and the terrorist only has to get it right once, and then you have a mass casualty event. And we must hope that our luck holds on this, intelligence holds, and that we keep on maintaining the networks and the understanding of what's coming to make sure that we don't have more attacks on our streets.
Dr. Alan Mendoza, thank you ever so much. It's always brilliant talking to you. Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. They're well worth following, by the way. Look at some of the reports that they produce and stay abreast of their research, because they are fully plugged into this.